The infection rate in some of these zip codes is double the infection rate in the city. The infection rate in the city, general population, is about 19%, almost 20%. In some of these communities, the infection rate is 40%, literally double the citywide average. And when we look at those new COVID cases coming into the hospitals, where are they coming from? They're coming from these zip codes, and we can literally identify it, so we want to attack the virus at the source. That's what we're going to be doing in New York. In New York City, we also have to get the number of tracers up and trained and online, and we'll be focusing on that. Statewide, we all have to remain smart. Regions that are opened, regions that are reopening, New York City that hasn't opened yet, where we have to get the numbers down. It's about citizens, and it's about what people do. That's been the great riddle in this whole thing. We don't understand it. It's about government, government this, government that. Forget government. This whole trajectory is decided by people. It's personal behavior. That's all it is. You tell me what people do today, I'll tell you what the infection rate is tomorrow. And it's simple. It's wash your hands, it's socially distance, it's use the hand sanitizer, and it is wear the mask. Wear the mask. And this is almost a point of cultural communication. Wearing a mask is now cool. I believe it's cool. If I could sign an executive order that says wearing a mask is officially cool, there is a certain amount of informing the public and accepting a new type of standard. Wearing the mask has got to be something you do every day. When you get up, when you walk out of the house, you put the mask on. And I said the other day, you know, New Yorkers want to reinforce it for other New Yorkers. This is cool. You want to encourage people to do this. By the way, you have all sorts of color masks. You don't have to have a boring mask like my mask. I'm a boring guy. They have color masks. They have masks that say things. Some people coordinate their outfit with the color of their mask. And this has to be part of literally who we are and what we do every day. That does not mean when someone doesn't wear a mask, we should be rude to that person or be obnoxious to that person. But this has got to be part of every New Yorker's fashion and design and clothing and outfitting, wearing the mask. It makes a real difference. And if you think that's all talk, answer for me why all the first responders have a lower infection rate than the general population. The only difference is they wore a mask, and they wore the PPE. So, wear a mask. Everyone has to do their part. Second track is, while we're reopening, supercharge the reopening, right? Stock market opened today. We want that economy to come roaring back. We want it to come roaring back. And that's not going to happen just by wishing it to be so. We have to take an affirmative action. We have to be part of that. And today is page 1 of that chapter. I don't believe that the economy just bounces back. Some economists say we artificially stop the economy, we release it, it went down, it's going to come right back in a straight line. I don't believe it comes straight back. I believe it bounces back, but it bounces back differently. We talk about the normal and the new normal. I think you're going to see the same thing with the economy. I don't think it comes right back to where it was. It's not like bouncing a basketball. You bounce a basketball, it goes down, it comes straight back up. It's like dropping a football. You drop a football, depending on how it hits, it goes off on different angles. The economy is going to come back up. I don't think it comes straight back up. And I think there will be winners and losers in this new economy. I think the top end of the economy will be fine. They always are. It always works out for them. You look at the 2008 recession after the mortgage fraud, we did the bailouts. The big banks were the first one to come back fine. But I don't think the economy comes back for everyone, everywhere, the same way. I think you're going to see American workers who are laid off. That's why I'm pushing the Americans First law in Washington. I think you're going to see corporations use this as an opportunity to, in their words, restructure, to get lean, to show the analysts we can increase the profit. How do you increase the profit fast in a corporation? You lay off workers. That's what you do. And I think you're going to see corporations do that. We've lost thousands of small businesses that just are not going to reopen their doors. So you're going to see pain in this new economy. And let's start to anticipate that, and let's start to deal with that now. We know that government can stimulate the economy. This country has done it in the past, where we have engaged in major public works that made the nation better, and when we did it, we stimulated the economy. You look at all the great things that this nation did, building the Hoover Dam, the Lincoln Tunnel, all these magnificent public improvements that made the nation and created thousands of jobs at the same time. Now, everyone has been talking about the need to do major infrastructure in this nation. Every president, Democrat, Republican, President Clinton talked about it, President Bush talked about it, President Obama talked about it, President Trump talked about it, Vice President Biden talks about it. We have major infrastructure needs. We're not building. The rest of the world is passing us by. It's true. Well, then do something about it. Don't just talk about it. Everybody's identified the same problem, Democrats and Republicans. But nobody has done anything. If there's ever a time to actually take on this overdue need of major infrastructure construction, now is the time. There is no better time to build than right now. You need to restart the economy, you need to create jobs, and you need to renew and repair this country's economy and its infrastructure. Now is the time to do it. It's especially the time to do it when some of the volume is lower, right? The time to fix the hole in the roof, we would say in Queens, is when the sun is shining. That's when you don't think that's a Queens expression? That was a Queens expression as far as I'm concerned. That's when you fix the hole in the roof, when the sun is shining. The time to do this work is now, when you need the jobs and the volume is low, and New York will lead the way. We are going to accelerate our big infrastructure programs. We have the Empire Station project, which is building a new Penn Station, which is long overdue. That Penn Station has been torturing people for too long. Let's now accelerate the Empire Penn project while the ridership is low and when we need the jobs. Accelerating LaGuardia Airport, which is going to be the first new airport in this nation in 25 years. Traffic is low, passenger volume is lower. Let's accelerate that construction now. And let's do things that we've been talking about for a long time, but we've never actually pulled the trigger on. We know that we need renewable power. We know we can generate renewable power in upstate. We know we need it downstate. Let's build the cross-state transmission lines to develop that renewable market upstate and satisfy the need downstate. We know they have low-cost hydropower in Canada. Let's run the cable, the transmission lines from Canada to New York City to get that power down here, and let's stop talking and let's start doing. Let's invigorate this whole renewable market. And there are other big infrastructure projects that we've been talking about, which we have to do, where we need federal help and federal approval. Let's put those on the table. The air train to LaGuardia, New York City is one of the only major cities that has no train from the airport into the central city. We've been talking about the Cross-Hudson tunnels, where the Amtrak trains come through, that are old and that are crumbling, and that if they become a problem, you literally stop Amtrak travel to the entire Northeast. Let's stop the politics on it, and let's get it done, and let's build those new tunnels. The 2nd Avenue subway, the next extension for the 2nd Avenue subway goes from 96th Street to 125th Street, would open up that whole 125th Street area. It would bring a whole new chapter of revitalization to New York City. Let's do that in partnership with the federal government. I'm going to go to Washington tomorrow, scheduled to meet with the president to talk about a number of things, but this is one of the things I want to talk to the president about. You want to restart the economy, you want to reopen the economy, let's do something creative, let's do it fast, let's put Americans back to work, and let's make America better. It is common sense. It is common sense. So many of the things that we need to do, you don't need to be a government expert or an engineer to figure out. It's common sense. You have an infrastructure that's crumbling. You need to jumpstart the economy. You need to create jobs. Do it now. Do it now. And that's what one of the things I'm going to talk to the president about tomorrow. Last point, we did the Wear a Mask New York PSA contest. I asked my daughter Mariah to help out, volunteer, pro bono, no money, supervised by a very nice, easygoing boss, moi, and Mariah agreed, and she did a fantastic job. And frankly, this contest has gone much bigger and generated much more energy and excitement than I anticipated. And with that, I will turn it over to Mariah.
Thank you. We launched the Wear a Mask ad contest in May, asking New Yorkers to create ads about the importance of wearing a mask in public. And we received over 600 video submissions from across the state. We selected 5 finalists and put it to a vote, and people cast 186,117 votes. And today, we are proud to announce the winning ad, which is We Heart New York. And with that, we'd like to...
I love New York. We love New York.
We've been stuck inside our homes,
while our everyday heroes have been working overtime.
For New York to reopen
and stay open.
We all need to do our part.
And show that we care.
Look, man.
I wear a mask to protect you.
You wear a mask to protect me.
Let's all wear a mask
to stop the spread of coronavirus
and save lives.
When we show up in the mask,
we're showing up for each other.
Show your love for New York.
Because New York loves you.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And congratulations to Bunny Lake Films, a female-founded boutique production company based in Brooklyn, New York, who created that incredible ad. And we'd now like to show the second place ad, which is You Can Still Smile.
I wear a mask for my fellow New Yorkers.
My mama, who's a healthcare worker.
Nurses and doctors.
For my father. For the marginalized communities who don't have access to adequate health care.
For my children.
My community.
Essential workers.
Transit workers.
The immunocompromised.
I wear a mask so we can get back to work.
Go to school. Share a meal.
See a movie.
Hug my friends.
Dance together.
Go to the theater.
See our families.
Continue to show support.
Take care of each other.
Save lives.
Stay strong.
Beautiful.
Thank you to everyone who submitted ads, who voted, who shared ads, and helped spread this important message that it's absolutely critical to wear a mask in public, and we'll be continuing to reach out to New Yorkers for help in spreading the message about how we can get through this together, because New Yorkers are clearly ready, willing, and able to help.
Beautiful. That is a great job. Now, I have to make an executive decision, not order. There is no election that we have nowadays that doesn't raise issues, it seems. This was extraordinary. we opened this up to competition. There were 96,000 votes for the first and second place winners. 96,000 votes, only a 500 vote differential between number one and number two, okay? Which, if it was a normal election, would normally trigger an automatic recount, all right? It's that close. There's also an issue with this election that we never really defined an eligible voter. And we have people who voted in this competition all across the state, all across the country, all across the world. We had international people voting in this competition, which I did not really fully think through. So rather than have a debate about who would have been an eligible voter, because that 500 votes between first and second is so small, if you start to have a question about who's an eligible voter, it could get dicey. So I'm going to make an executive decision. The state will run both ads, first and second, because they're both great. And obviously, yes, won by 500 votes, but it was a tremendous turnout. People love both. That's clear. So the state will run both, and we don't have to get into a debate about who is an eligible voter in a video competition. So we'll run both of those PSAs. I want to thank all the voters who participated. That tremendous number just shows how engaged people are all through this. This is about life and death. This is about their lives. This is about their community, and they're engaged, and they should be, because they are New York tough, smart, united, disciplined, and loving. Questions?
Governor, on the bill in Albany that would authorize the city of New York to borrow $7 billion, are you open to signing that bill? My understanding is they're having trouble meeting basic operating expenses without it, assuming the federal government doesn't come through. And assuming that the economy comes back unevenly and the people at the top are okay, would you ever favor raising taxes on the wealthy?
Yeah, you know, let's deal with the here and now, and then we'll deal with the future when we figure out what the future is. There's no doubt that governments are hard-stretched. State government is hard-stretched. We have a $13 billion deficit. City is stretched. Local governments are stretched all across the state, all across the nation. That's why I think the real answer is the federal government has to step up and provide state and local aid. There was also a piece in the Wall Street Journal that said in those situations when the state and local governments are starved, the economic recovery is slower than when you actually fund state and local governments, which makes sense because if you starve the state government, what happens? I turn around, there's less funding for schools, less funding for hospitals, less funding for local governments, and that's police and fire. So we need funding from Washington. If we don't get funding from Washington, we're going to have a serious financial issue. And it's going to compound our state problem overall. What do you do if you don't get federal funding? Well, then you have to be fiscally responsible. And for New York City, New York State, Suffolk, Nassau, it's going to be the same question. Well, borrow a lot of money. Well, is it fiscally responsible, what you're borrowing? Do you have any chance to pay it back? When you start talking about borrowing to pay operating expenses, this is a whole new situation. Normally, you borrow for capital expenses. You're making an investment, it's going to increase future revenue. Borrowing for operating expenses is fiscally questionable. So it's an issue that we're going to face for the state, an issue we'll face for the city, and fiscal responsibility is very important here. We don't want to create more debt than the state can pay going forward. And we don't want to create a situation where the state or any local government borrows so much money that they can't repay it, and then you have to start to cut services, and now you're in that vicious downward spiral, right? We've been there before. New York City has been there before. So I'm still banking on Washington doing the intelligent thing. It's prudent for everyone. If that does not happen, we're going to have to make hard choices, but they're going to have to be fiscally responsible. And I haven't even looked at those issues for the city or for the state because I still don't want to create the possibility or the excuse for Washington to say, well, we don't have to act, you can just go mortgage your future. I'm not in the mortgaging for future option scenario.
Mentioned in recent days that CDC guidance changed with regard to transmission of the virus on surfaces. In light of that, has the MTA's nightly disinfecting of every surface on every train been a misallocation of resources? Would you instead instruct them to get ready for the reopening by handing out masks to every single rider or to increase capacity?
Andrew, all of the above. The CDC did not say, first of all, the CDC did not say you can't get it from surfaces. They said you can get it from surfaces, but it's not a major transmission source. What does that mean? And they previously had suggested that it was a major source. But even if it's not a major source, you know, this is tricky. If I get the virus, I don't care if I got it from a minor transmission source. I don't want to get the virus. So even if only 20% of the people get infected from surfaces, I'm still worried about those 20% of the people. So I think for the MTA, for any organization, it's all of the above. Yes, masks. Yes, hand sanitizer. Yes, social distancing. And yes, clean and disinfect the surfaces. Because even if they're right, and again, that assumes they're right, and let's be honest, the experts have changed their opinions and their numbers and their projections 3 times through this thing. So even if they're right, and it's only a minor source now, it's still a source. And do everything you can. Do everything you can. Do everything you can. And that's what we're doing.
What do you think a rider should do if they're going back to work and there's someone on their train who's not wearing a mask?
Look, New Yorkers are tough, right? As we've said. There is a social responsibility, I believe, to wear a mask. I believe it should be part of our culture. I think we should encourage each other to be responsible and to wear it. I encourage people when I'm walking around the street and somebody doesn't have a mask and they're walking past me. I encourage them nicely, politely, point out some facts. But it's New York. We have to be careful that that nice and polite stays nice and polite. And people are afraid now, and you can see tempers flare, and you can see the energy goes up. I think that's not helpful. I think you can have conversations with people and point it out, but keep it friendly and helpful and constructive.
Over the weekend, I did some interviews out on the boardwalk in Long Beach, and people were already expressing concern about a second wave coming. They were happy the boardwalk was open, but you know it's going to get crowded and we're going to get a second wave. Have you started forming like a new plan for a second wave, and how would it be different from what we did this time?
Yeah. The way we are reopening, in many ways, anticipates the possibility of a second wave. It is built into our reopening plan. When we say you must reserve 30% capacity in the hospitals, that's anticipating either a current surge or a second wave. 30% of the ICU beds have to be available. That's anticipating either a current surge, people are undisciplined, you have a hot spot, or a second wave. Hospitals must have 90 days of PPE on hand. We're not going through that can't find the mask crazy scramble again, right? All the PPE has to be in place for 90 days at the COVID level. All those early indicators, getting the testing capacity up. What's going to happen when you get to the fall, even if there's not a second wave? People will need flu tests for the normal flu. Right now, we're using basically all our testing capacity to do the COVID tests. So we're planning for testing in the fall split between the flu test and the COVID test. But what we are now doing builds in the anticipation of the possibility of a second wave. And look, I don't even know if it's a second wave anymore. They now talk about basically it's not going away. It's not that it's going to go away and come back like they first talked about the second wave. It's just that there may be a lull, a seasonal lull because of the summer climate, but then it comes back, it increases in the fall because it never really went away.
The stock exchange directed its employees to avoid taking public transit to work. Do you think that's a wise policy? Do you think that the subway is a super spreader of the virus? And at that, have you identified which phase of the reopening the overnight subway service will resume? What date are you looking at on that?
Yeah, as I've said, I don't pick dates in the future. We have had projection models from day one on this. We've followed the projection models. Remember, the projection models said we could need about 120,000 hospital beds. We only have 50,000 hospital beds. I spent 1 month developing thousands of hospital beds off the projections, and we did it. It was probably the largest single undertaking that I've undertaken as governor, and we did it. And then the projection model didn't come true. Now, in defense of the projection models, they'll say, well, we had a number of variables that changed, and we didn't know how effective social distancing would be, and social distancing turned out to be more effective because people were more responsible, so the numbers came down. But I don't think you can project into the future. I don't think anybody can say, I'll tell you what's going to happen in 4 weeks. So I know the numbers today. We'll know the numbers tomorrow. Make decisions based on the facts you know. And that's what we're going to do. So I am not going to give you a future projection. The MTA, public transportation, has to be ready when you reopen. Everything has to be staged, and public transportation has to be working. You can't do a full reopening without public transportation. You just can't. You don't have an option of everybody walks or everybody drives or everybody bicycles. You can't do that in this metropolitan area. You have people coming in from New Jersey, Connecticut, et cetera. So you need Metro North, et cetera. So the question becomes, how do you reopen public transportation? And we have trains, cleaner than ever before, remarkably so. We need social distancing precautions. You need the masks, you need the sanitizer, you need to schedule in a way so you don't overload a train. But I'll tell you one of the silver linings here. The subways have never been as clean as they are now, and we're helping more homeless people than ever before. For me, this has been an issue that we've worked on for a long time, and there's been a lot of dissension. And I spent my whole life working on the homeless issue. And finally, we've had the wisdom to understand that you're not really helping the homeless by letting them sleep on the train. That was a misguided theory. Well, we respect your civil rights and civil liberties. We're going to let you sleep on a subway car and risk getting molested or hurt during the night. No, they deserved better. Offer them safe shelter, offer them services. That was always the answer. And now, because we closed the subway to clean the cars, this homeless have to be off the subway, otherwise you can't clean the car. And it's the first time you've actually had a real outreach program. So out of crisis comes positive.
What about the stock exchange policy? Do you think that the subway is a spreader of the virus right now? Is it safe to ride?
No, look, I think the subways have never been cleaner, and people are social distancing and they're wearing masks. You know, there's no configuration on a subway done right. That's not a sidewalk done right. That's not any other place done right. If you have an overcrowded subway car, well, then you're where you are with an overcrowded sidewalk or an overcrowded lobby or an overcrowded elevator. You know, then it's the same thing.
One company this morning, I think it was JP Morgan, I could be wrong about that, that refused to participate in the opening of the floor. They're not going to send it, they don't agree with the criteria and other things. What do you say to a company who doesn't even want to participate?
I think you will see people making their own decisions. I think you'll see companies make their own decisions. We've never been here before. You know, they opened some parts of China, and just because the government says, okay, we're back, some people said, I'm not ready to be back. You know, I'm not ready to get on public transportation. I'm not ready to walk down the sidewalk. I'm going to sit home and I'm going to watch to see what happens. People have gone through a trauma. People are scared. So I think you'll see all sorts of individual decisions by companies, by people, and some people are going to hang back and say, I want to see the facts. I don't want to be the first one out. I think that's all fine, and I think that's to be expected. I think there's an emotional transition here as much as there is a physical transition. And again, I don't think this is about government rules. I think it's about everyone has informed themselves. You're talking about my life now. You have my attention. You're talking about my kids. You're talking about my mother. I'm taking this very seriously, and I've informed myself, and I'm going to make my own judgment. Thank you very much. Well, the federal government says, the president says, the governor says. I don't care what they say. I'm going to make my own decision. And I think that's fine, because this is really about restoring confidence and comfort. And it doesn't happen until you feel confident and comfortable. Anyone want to make some points? Melissa, Gareth? Any more votes? How come you got more votes for that competition than you got for your old dad? Let's take one more.
We're nearing the end of May, and it's still unclear how much money the federal government will give the state. Do you anticipate that the state will unveil the state budget cuts before or after?
No, Luis. You tell me what the federal government does, I will tell you what the state budget looks like. And I want them to have that responsibility. Right now, you have a $13 billion deficit. We will cut schools with no money from the federal government. Schools get cut 20%, local government gets cut 20%, and hospitals get 20% cut. That's what happens today. That's the budget. It's done. And by the way, the budget is done. It was passed in April. That's the budget. How do you avoid those cuts? It's purely dependent on what the federal representatives do. And remember, the House is controlled by congressional Democrats. The Senate is controlled by Republicans. But I've said to them very clearly, this is a situation where the people of this state are going to know what you did. Right now, if you do nothing, we have a 20% cut to schools. If you want to cut schools 20%, then don't fund New York. If you want to cut police and fire 20%, then don't fund New York. If you want to cut our hospitals 20%, don't fund New York. And the way to avoid those cuts is the Congress has to deliver. You know, I believe that politicians should be held accountable. When I would watch TV with my grandfather, my father's father, Andrea, the Italian name, Andrew, and a politician would start to talk on the TV, my grandfather would go like this. And, you know, a lot of his mannerisms were Italian, and I didn't understand them, so I didn't ask. But he would go like this. And then one day I said, Grandpa, I said, what is that? What are you doing there? He said, that's all they do, these politicians, is talk. He didn't mean my father, but that's a different conversation. That's all they do is talk. Yeah, federal representatives, it's your turn to deliver. We need help. I don't care, federal politics, Washington politics. We need help, and we need you to deliver. And we need you to deliver the SALT repeal, which is also in the House bill, which was a theft from the people of the state of New York in the first place. And I want to keep the focus right there. So they are held accountable. You know, nobody really knows anymore who does what. What does the state do? What does the federal government do? And if they're not held accountable, then people can, it can become too easy. This one can't be easy. We need federal help. If we don't get it, call your congressperson. And I want to keep the focus there.
Yeah. Why not use the crisis to push forward an actual subway extension instead of the current plan, which is pretty unpopular among transit experts?
You know what's more unpopular? Forget your transit experts. You know what's more unpopular than the people in the neighborhoods that are affected? The subway plan. So, look, you have two questions. You have funding is an issue, and then you have feasibility of the project. I don't want a project that's going to be in court for 150 years and that gets kicked down the can down the road, which is what happens with so many public works. When I say I'm going to do something, I actually do it, which is a little different. I say I'm going to build a Monday Cuomo bridge, I build it. I say I'm going to redo tunnels, I do it. So I want to I say I'm going to build a new airport, I do it. And I do it in real time. And I want projects that are real as opposed to, you know, theoretical. I have a great idea. In a perfect world, we could do this. Yeah, when the world is perfect, then I'll do it. Thank you for taking time.
Initiated the meeting with the president tomorrow. So this was part 2, continuing your last discussion.
Well, we've had multiple discussions. It's not part 2. It's probably part 28.
Is it fiscal package you're trying to get out of Washington primarily, would you say?
Literally, my 3 favorite topics. And the state of New York. Talk to you later. Thank you. Thank you, Stock Exchange.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The concentration of the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You were donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Joining us now is the nation's top doctor, Surgeon General Jerome Adams. How soon could we have a therapeutic in the hands of our caregivers?
Making sense of our world. The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell on CBS.
Concerns about COVID-19 didn't stop millions of Americans from celebrating the unofficial start of the summer. People packed beaches across the country over Memorial Day weekend, even as the deadly disease claimed at least 2,000 more lives. For more on this, let's bring in New York pediatrician, Dr. Diane Hess. So, doctor, we saw people on social media putting some social distancing measures over the holiday weekend, but we saw a lot of videos also of people not doing that. We saw people in pools and on beaches, and I just wonder what kind of impact that could have in the coming weeks. Could we potentially start to see levels of infections rising in some of those locations?
Oh, I think for sure. I think, only time will tell, and I think this is what physicians and scientists have been waiting for. It's for some reason, the communities are not trusting their medical professionals about social distancing, and they're testing boundaries. And when these communities start getting sick, like the teenagers who were our college break students who all got sick in Florida, then they went on social media and said, oh, I'm sorry, I was drunk on a beach with hundreds of other people, now I have COVID. Is that what it's going to take for these states to realize social distancing rules are in place for a reason? I have to say that I feel like in New York City, because we've seen the brunt of it, people are taking it. I mean, not everybody, but I went out yesterday. I did errands. We went to Walmart. Every single person was wearing a mask. Everybody was so respectful. They were sanitizing the carts. And I think that these states that haven't seen the magnitude of COVID are just in denial, and it's going to hit them.
Yeah, Vlad was talking about, people going to pools. I know there was a big pool party in the Ozarks, and that's, you can see the picture everywhere. And in Missouri, they've asked those people to self-quarantine. And it occurred to me, we've talked a lot about the importance of contact tracing and how when an event like this happens, the fact that we don't have proper contact tracing implemented yet in this country can have dire results. Like, you look at that aerial shot of all those kids in the pool, and you're like, who's going to keep track of who showed up at this party and who's quarantining and who's not?
And who stopped to get beer on the way, who stopped at the deli on the way. I mean, there's so many people that they have come in contact with. They fueled, there is a reason that we are recommending these measures. I mean, I feel like unless it was at a national level, unless this is done at federal level, I should say, that this is never going to end, because every state is, doing something haphazardly.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor, it's interesting to me, in addition to all those people that we saw in the pool, there seems to still be a misunderstanding, at least as far as I can tell, when you see videos like that, where people say, when they speak to reporters, a lot of young people especially say, well, you know what, I'm young, I'm healthy, I think I could beat this if I ever get it. And what I fail to understand is why is it so hard for people to understand that these measures are in place, not always to protect yourself, although they are used for that. It's also to protect other people. I don't know how often it needs to be hammered home how asymptomatic people can infect people who are at risk. You've got the President of the United States who refuses to wear a mask a day after the Surgeon General of the United States, the top medical officer in this country, releases a public service announcement saying, as you go and enjoy your Memorial Day festivities, please wear a mask. The Surgeon General was wearing one. The President of the United States refuses to wear one for reasons that are still unclear to people. Can you just once again explain to the audience why the mask is important, not necessarily for yourself, but for others, and what 6 feet apart social distancing means when people can be asymptomatic and they sneeze in the vicinity of other people who have comorbidities?
So we know that the droplets can travel 13, 14 feet in the air. So yes, President Trump might think he's the healthiest person on the earth, and I might think I'm very healthy. But when I go out, I wear that mask out of respect for you. So I'm wearing that mask. So if I do sneeze or I do cough, I don't spray all the people around me. And we all know that there are hundreds of thousands of probably people who are asymptomatic. I mean, when we're doing the testing now, we're seeing that many, many people, and look at all the kids who are getting this syndrome, the multi-inflammatory syndrome. They didn't even know, most of them didn't even know they had COVID. So there are tons of people who are asymptomatic. So we wear this because we respect other people who are going to go home and take care of their grandma, or who are going to go home and take care of their child with cancer. Listen, I talk about this till my face is blue about vaccines. What do you do with the anti-vaccine movement? It's the same thing. They say, I don't need the vaccine, I'm healthy. But we vaccinate everybody to protect, especially with MMR, to protect those people who would die if they got the measles or the mumps or rubella. It's the same kind of scenario.
So let's talk about this inflammatory syndrome that you just mentioned, because it sort of piggybacks on what both of you said, this idea that young people, won't get it as badly. Well, somehow that's not entirely true. And what we started to see in children is this inflammatory syndrome that looks very similar to Kawasaki disease. Yeah, the numbers aren't tremendous, but it's something we didn't know about COVID-19 before. And now we're seeing it not just in children, doctor, but also in younger people as well, or people older than children, younger adults older than children.
Very true. And also, so like in some practices, we see college age students. Like in my practice, we see kids till they're 24, really basically till they're young adults. But in many pediatric practices, they don't see young adults, and then they get discharged when they're 18. And these young adults, honestly, many of them don't even have a primary care doctor because they're very healthy. So they use urgent cares a lot. So they don't even have a medical home. And when you're sick like this, when you feel like you have fever for 4 or 5 days, you have red eyes, swollen glands, rash, abdominal pain, diarrhea, you need a medical home. You need somebody to contact to tell them, I am not doing well, or you should just go straight to the ER, because until proven otherwise, if you have this constellation of symptoms, this is, multi-inflammatory syndrome in children.
Before I say thank you, and I know they kind of want to wrap us up, but I want to ask you this. The weather is getting better. People do want to get out. And, for some people, staying at home has been fine, but for others, it's been a tremendous strain, stress-wise. I just wonder if you have any sort of words of wisdom to people who are itching to make contact with others. Some people, they thrive when they are in the presence of other human beings, and this is really tough for them.
Especially children. That's what we do all day. I would say that if you want your children to socialize, they need to wear masks if they're with other children. If they're over age 2, they should be socially distanced. Maybe they can go to a playground or a beach and play next to each other in the sand, but not on top of each other. They need to wear masks, good hand washing, maybe go for a bike ride together with a mask on, go for a walk, socially distanced. But you can't have these parties. I mean, yesterday was Memorial Day and my daughter went bike riding with a friend. They've been quarantining, sheltering in place together since this started. They came home so aggravated because they saw barbecues with tons of cars parked in front of people's homes. They're kids, and they said, we're doing it, and we're working so hard to stop this, and then the grown-ups aren't listening.
It's so true. Dr. Diane Hess, thank you so much, doctor.
All right, take care, be safe.
Oh my God, the truck is sinking.
Devastating flooding has reached catastrophic levels.
Rising sea levels are threatening America's coasts.
You would have to take that house and put it on stilts 10 feet tall. If the street is filled with salt water, what difference does it make how high you make your house?
The concentration of the highest rental rates is exactly where the elevation is highest.
This was the evidence to prove that climate gentrification was real.
Pay $1,800 in 5 days or you have to leave. Were you scared?
Yes.
Every single person who stood up and said, I am not paying this rent increase, received an eviction.
Haitians built this place and you're getting kicked out.
Yes.
In 60 years, we went from about 100,000 factory workers to probably about 7,000.
Off in the distance, you can see some factories that are still humming, but most of them are just kind of abandoned.
The restaurant industry right now is one of the largest and fastest growing industries in America. And yet it continues to be the absolute lowest paying employer in the United States.
Barely anybody's making enough to live.
You're donating plasma to get by.
It's literally a slave wage.
I don't remember growing up like this. My mom didn't have to go to food banks. It's pretty sad.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
Boom.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative,
Da-da-da-da.
and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
Joining us now is the nation's top doctor, Surgeon General Jerome Adams. How soon could we have a therapeutic in the hands of our caregivers?
Making sense of our world. The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell on CBS.
To New York now, where a video of a white woman calling the police on a black man has gone viral. The man says that the incident occurred when he asked the woman to leash her dog in accordance with Central Park rules. But when she allegedly refused, he began filming, and that's when she threatened to call the cops.
There is an African-American man. I am in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog. And I'm sorry, I can't hear you either. I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
So the key was that she told police that she was being threatened, though he wasn't behaving in a threatening manner. The woman was quickly identified on social media as Amy Cooper, prompting the company where she works to place her on administrative leave. She also voluntarily surrendered her dog to the rescue that she adopted it from. In response to the backlash, Cooper apologized for her behavior in an interview, calling it unacceptable, and went on to say, quote, "I think of the police as a protective agency, and unfortunately, this has caused me to realize that there are so many people in this country that don't have that luxury." So we want to take you back to a story that we mentioned earlier today that we've been covering out of Minneapolis, where a man is dead after being stopped by police. There was video of that. It went viral, and, want to warn you, like Vlad did earlier, that it's some pretty disturbing stuff. But this entire incident has caught the attention of Amy Klobuchar as well. We want to bring in Jeff Pegues, because, Jeff, you've been following this story. So it happened over the weekend. It was a holiday weekend. People, for whatever they could do, might have been out and about, and they might have missed the details of it. Can you just sort of bring us up to speed about the video and what happens in it?
Well, it happened late Monday, according to the accounts that we have. And this was an incident where police say they were called to the scene because of a forgery in progress. Not really sure at this time what exactly that means. But what we see is where the video picks up, and the man is on the ground. He's an African-American man. There is a white police officer who has his knee on the man's neck. And, it's really important for you to see this video, because I really can't do it justice by describing it, but I can, certainly do my best here. But the officer has his knee to the man's neck for more than 5 minutes. The man is saying to the onlookers, to the officers, there are two officers there, including the one who has his foot on the man's at the back of his neck, that he can't breathe. And he says it numerous times. And so you have onlookers there who are recording with their cell phone cameras, and they are telling the police officers to stop, to help the man. But instead, this video goes on, and it is the kind of video that has gone viral because, for what we see on camera, frankly, this is not something that you see every day, and it is disturbing no matter where you stand on police-community relations issues. And you're seeing here in the clip, I don't know where this is, at what point in the clip, but you can see that the officer has his hand on his thigh or in his pocket, his knee on the man's neck. And some of the onlookers describe blood coming from the man's nose, as he is saying that I can't breathe multiple times. And of course, as someone who has covered this issue for many years now, it reminds me of the Eric Garner case. When he died on that sidewalk in Staten Island, New York, after or during a confrontation with police, he also said that he could not breathe. And it became a rallying cry for people across the country who wanted to bring an end to police misconduct, if you will, or at least root out police misconduct. And so what you're seeing here in this videotape is in some ways reminiscent of that, and it is disturbing to watch.
Jeff, what can you tell us about the man who died, in as much as we know what we can know from the police? I mean, did he have a weapon on him? Was he accused, or was he being suspected of committing some kind of a violent crime? What do we know about him?
Well, and that is an important question. And then, of course, when I first saw that video, that's the question I had was he armed? Were police trying to arrest him because of some violent crime? And again, police say that there was a forgery in progress. He was not armed. The African-American man was not armed in this incident. And so it does raise a lot of questions about the tactics used in this case. And clearly the onlookers saw that the man was having trouble breathing, that he was bleeding at least from his nose. And if you watch the video, which goes on for more than 7 minutes, you can see that there is a point where if he was indeed resisting arrest, he stopped. Now, we don't know if he stopped because he was unconscious, but he was clearly not resisting the officer involved. So there are a lot of questions that have to be answered here, and they will. The police department has moved fairly quickly in acknowledging that this case will be investigated. They have called in the FBI to help them investigate this case. The officers have been placed on administrative paid leave. So the investigation is currently underway, and there are a lot of answers that we still don't have. But if you look at the tape, and a lot of people, millions of people across the country have seen it by now, you will see that there's some real questions here about the tactics that the police officers used.
You mentioned what the police department is doing and the officers on administrative leave. I'm wondering about the public response. You know, we saw in the Ahmaud Arbery case that it was the video that really got people fired up. And even in this kind of lockdown era, there were protests. How is the public reacting to this?
We're seeing the same kind of reaction, and it is sort of along the lines of what we expected. Especially when you see this tape. In fact, later on today in Minneapolis, there is expected to be a protest. They're calling it the I Can't Breathe protest, and again, reminiscent of the Eric Garner case in Staten Island. And so while millions of people have already seen this videotape, there are still many more who are seeing it for the first time now. And what we're seeing, it is motivating people to protest, at least in Minneapolis, where I will be later on today.
Jeff, we mentioned in the lead up to introducing you that Senator Amy Klobuchar has responded to this incident. What did she have to say?
Yeah, she released a 2-paragraph statement, of course. Klobuchar is the former Democratic presidential candidate, who's now endorsed Joe Biden, but she has called for an investigation, a complete and thorough outside investigation, what you will have with the FBI involved in this case. And she's calling for those involved to be held accountable. And, you know, there are a lot of people asking, well, why is the FBI involved? Because, you know, the question is, were this man's civil rights violated? And you know, post-Ferguson, there has been a lot of talk about whether police departments should police themselves. And so in this case, you have the police chief moving fairly quickly and acknowledging that the FBI will step in and investigate this case, so that there are no questions about whether police can really thoroughly investigate this case.
All right, Jeff, thank you so much. Appreciate your reporting.
My pleasure.
For an update on President Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, let's turn to campaign reporter Nicole Scanga.
Here's what you need to know about the president and his re-election campaign today. As the coronavirus death toll nears 100,000, the president took to golfing and to Twitter this past weekend, targeting his political rivals, including former Vice President and likely Democratic nominee Joe Biden. Also, gubernatorial candidate from Georgia, Stacey Abrams, Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and his 2016 opponent, Hillary Clinton. The president visited Arlington National Cemetery and Fort McHenry on Monday to commemorate the fallen. Next, the president suggested Monday that he may move the location of the Republican National Convention from Charlotte, North Carolina to Florida if North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper does not ease up some of that state's economic restrictions in the coming months. And keep an eye on this week, the president heads to Florida on Wednesday, where he'll attend a space launch at NASA's Kennedy Center. The president's re-election campaign, meanwhile, has invested $1 million targeting former Vice President Joe Biden after his "Ain't You Black" remark on The Breakfast Club. Those ads will run online in the coming days.
What's going on with Joe Biden's presidential bid? Let's check in with campaign reporter Bo Erickson. Bo, how's the campaign going?
This is what we're watching for Joe Biden's campaign. After 74 days of social distance campaigning from his Delaware home, he made his first public stop for a Memorial Day event. Both him and his wife, Dr. Jill Biden, laid a flower wreath at a Veterans Memorial Park. And we were able to see how public campaigning could go for Joe Biden this summer once he returns to the campaign trail. First, they both wore dark face masks. They've been critical of how President Trump has been reluctant to wear face masks during this pandemic. And while it was a little hard to hear Joe Biden, he told reporters that it felt good to be outside of his home. Second, we saw his Secret Service detail. Former vice presidents usually don't keep Secret Service detail years after they left office, but he regained that protection once he became the presumptive Democratic nominee. And while obviously they provide an extra layer of protection, they also provide an extra layer of social distancing as well. And third, we're able to see how some physical travel can change a message. The Biden campaign has been very critical of President Trump's playing golf this weekend during the coronavirus and in the lead up to Memorial Day. But they are also trying to move beyond those comments that Joe Biden made to a radio program on Friday, implying that if black voters supported President Trump, well, then they were not black. Joe Biden expressed regret for these comments later in the day on Friday. And as he starts to think about, and as we watch him maybe go to some of these early campaign events this summer, he says that he is trying to go to places that have been hardest hit by the coronavirus.
All right, so now we're going to take you to England, where there's a bit of a political crisis unfolding because there may have been a breach of the UK stay-at-home order by none other than the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson's top advisor. There's growing calls for Dominic Cummings to resign after the UK Prime Minister's chief aide drove 250 miles to his parents' home in northeast England back in March, just days after Britain went into lockdown. Cummings and his wife were reportedly showing coronavirus symptoms at the time, and he says that they made the trip so extended family could take care of their 4-year-old son if their condition worsened. Here's more on how he defended his decision.
I don't regret what I did. As I said, I think reasonable people may well disagree about how I thought about what to do in these circumstances, but I think that what I did was actually reasonable in these circumstances. In terms of the rules, I think that the rules make clear that if you're dealing with small children, then that can be exceptional circumstances. And I think that the situation that I was in was exceptional circumstances. And I think that the way that I dealt with it was the least risk to everybody concerned if my wife and I had both been unable to look after our 4-year-old.
All right, so Elizabeth Palmer is joining us now to talk a little bit more about the situation. You know, Elizabeth, I think what he's describing, many parents have found themselves grappling with, not necessarily sort of being sick and wondering what to do with their child, but childcare in general, when there are no schools, there's no daycare, and you have to keep working, and perhaps you find yourself becoming ill as well. So Before we get into all of that, though, just tell us who Dominic Cummings is and why, the fact that he did this is upsetting so many people.
Dominic Cummings is one of Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister's most trusted advisors. He's sometimes referred to in the press here as the Svengali, the Rasputin, the Machiavelli. He is a guy who's regarded as having helped the Prime Minister not only win the Brexit campaign, but win the election in December. So a key guy. His wife said she was, well, let's begin with March 23rd, the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, announced the lockdown here, and he said to the whole country, you must stay home. 4 days later, Dominic Cummings, we now learn, left his home because his wife had been feeling ill, and he thought if he got his family 200 miles north of here to his father's farm, and they both fell ill, family in the area could come and look after their little boy. That's raised some eyebrows. I mean, we're being asked to believe that Dominic Cummings in this international city of London with 11 million people, where he also has family, well connected as he is, wouldn't have been able to find child care locally. I think that a lot of people here feel as if that's stretching the limits of credibility.
So, Liz, what's been the reaction from lawmakers to all of this controversy? We know at least one of Boris Johnson's junior ministers has resigned.
Yes, he has, the Minister for Scotland. 30 more members of Boris Johnson's own party have now spoken openly, saying Dominic Cummings just can't stay. You heard in the clip there him saying that there was some wiggle room when it came to kids. People weren't commanded to stay home. If there was absolutely no alternative, then they should use their own judgment. But not only government ministers, but clerics and many thousands of people in Britain have been saying openly, look, we were also in what could be called a crisis. We didn't go out of the house, even though we had childcare problems, we had parents who were ill, we had pressing family occasions to attend. People just said no to themselves. They decided to stay home. And for some reason, Dominic Cummings decided that he was above, if not the letter of the law, at least the spirit of the law. There has been a wave of fury about this, and maybe compounded by the fact that Boris Johnson is backing